Okay, so I'm Dan McCole at Michigan State University. As part of the Northern Grapes Project, I've been working on a couple different studies. Some of you might have heard some of the work we did on profiling tasting room visitors. But I've also been working on collaboration with in wineries, and specifically with a focus on wine tourism. That's probably why I wasn't the best person suited to answer that question. So when I look at collaboration, I am looking at winery-to-winery collaboration, which would include things like co-ops. However, I'm also looking at collaboration between wineries and the tourism industry. And the reason why that was part of the grant is that, especially with a lot of the emerging wineries and smaller wineries, which tend to be related to the cold climate wines and the cold hardy wines, a lot of what they sell is out of the tasting room, a higher percentage than Greg put forward earlier. I think Greg said, I couldn't really, it was a little garbled, but 40 to 50% maybe sold wholesale. That's not necessarily the case for a lot of the cold hardy wineries. A lot of them sell out of the tasting room, and because of that, drawing people to the tasting room is important, and that's a tourism effort. So looking at collaboration with the tourism industry too. So if we look at the importance of collaboration, and these are sort of some of the, some of our background research as to what other people have done. It said, found things that really shouldn't be surprising to anybody on this webinar. But it did specify that collaboration is very important for newer wineries and growing wine regions, more so than more established wineries and wine regions. And the reasons for that are you have less experienced growers, winemakers, and tourism business owners. And the idea of collaborating is through a collaborative effort, you can speed your way up the learning curve. And when people do share information or resources or just interact with each other, they can speed their way up that learning curve. Another reason, speeding up the learning curve with some of the technical aspects of growing and winemaking with new varieties of grapes. So with some of the newer varieties, take for instance Marquette, collaborating can help everybody get better at making Marquette. So it won't take as many years as it took us at some point to figure out what Merlot should taste like, as an example. Establishing regions that are recognized. In order to establish a recognized region that people, visitors, wine drinkers recognize as a good place to get their wine, that usually takes a collaborative effort. And a region will have much more success doing that if they work together than if each winery works alone to try to establish that region. And if the region is successful, everybody will benefit. And then introducing experienced wine drinkers to local varietals. Those of you who are selling cold hardy wines probably recognize this. One of the challenges you have is to take somebody who is an experienced wine drinker and introducing them to new varietals of wine that they might be skeptical about. Some people are certainly adventurous and they're willing to try anything new. But figuring out the best ways to introduce people, oftentimes that can be done better collaboratively. And then, of course, converting non-wine drinkers. So these are some of the important reasons why collaboration is especially important in wineries that are newer and in growing wine regions. Some of the benefits of collaboration, these will be in the handouts. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. I'll click through them. Increased visitors, brand equity, providing a better experience to people, favorable policies and legislation, research that addresses the needs of the industry, improved understanding of emerging problems, et cetera, expertise, community relations. All of those things which are important to wineries and regions. Those are some of the benefits that can happen better through collaboration. So that's what I was saying earlier. We tend to look at collaboration as a positive thing. So Greg brings up an exceptional point. Not all collaboration is good. I think our research focused on, okay, for when collaboration is good, what is the best way to go about it? And actually our research did address, to some extent, and I'll share this toward the end, some of the ways of deciding what is a good collaboration worthy of investment of time and effort. So first, you know, as researchers at a university, whenever we do some kind of research project, we'd like to have some kind of theoretical base to work off of. Don't let that scare you off. So one of the theories we use is very straightforward. It's called social exchange theory. This is not rocket science. The idea is that participants in any relationship will maintain that relationship, assuming that the benefits they receive from the relationship exceed the cost they put into it better than the alternative. So this goes from everything from a marriage to a business relationship to collaboration. So that's what social exchange theory goes from, and that sort of explains what's going on here, because you know, a winery collaboration, a collaboration between wineries, is a social exchange. And we can take a couple things away from that. One, collaboration is a form of social exchange and therefore is guided by this principle. And two, collaborators have alternatives for use of their limited resources. So any winery, you know, especially the smaller the winery, this applies, but they have a limited amount of time, a limited amount of financial resources to invest in things. And there are a lot of great ideas that people have of, hey, let's work together on this plan, or let's work together on this plan. They just can't invest in all of those, and I'm sure everybody on this can relate to that. And they have to choose alternatives. And so we wanted to know more about how they go about those alternatives. But to demonstrate sort of what we're talking about here, you know, you have organization A, they have a choice to make. Should they place their effort here to this alternative, to alternative 2, or should they place their effort to alternative 3? They can't do it all. And let's say that what we're talking about is, you know, we have these, and then what we have is each organization is making that decision. So if you have a collaborative initiative, organization A is deciding whether they want to contribute to that, and so is organization B and organization C. And remember, they all have different alternatives that they could go for. So the idea is that a collaborative initiative that these 3 organizations would work on would lead to a positive outcome. And so to demonstrate this in the wine industry, let's say that instead of organizations, we're talking about wineries. So winery A is deciding whether they're going to put effort into this collaborative initiative. That also, let's call it a wine festival. And winery B and winery C are also going to collaborate. And the idea is that if they all collaborate on putting together this wine festival, it will lead to some kind of positive outcome. In this case, it's probably things like more tasting room visitors, an increase in wine sales, more wine drinkers, improved brand equity of the wine region. There could be a whole list more, but you get the idea, positive outcomes. So how does each of those organizations decide where they're going to put their efforts? That's where we started focusing on. And lo and behold, there's another theory that guides this, and if any of you went to business school, you've probably heard of this. It's called expectancy theory. Expectancy theory is also very easy to understand and kind of common sense. The idea is that an expectancy theory is a motivation theory. It's we will be motivated to do something if we believe our effort will lead to an outcome. So if we don't think that, you know, that our investment in this initiative is going to lead to an outcome, we're going to be less motivated. Or if we're not sure, we're going to be less motivated. The other part of this is that we desire that outcome. So we're motivated to do something if we believe our effort will lead to an outcome and we desire that outcome. You know, we may think, oh yeah, if I participate in this collaboration, it's going to lead to these outcomes, but those aren't really important to me. And I've seen this before with wine trails. We sometimes have a very successful wine trail, and there's we have a couple of these in Michigan. There's a small winery that doesn't participate, and the others try to, you know, convince them to participate. And they said, you know what, we really don't need to. We don't produce that much wine. We get enough visitors here, and when we're part of the winery wine trail, we get even more visitors than we can handle, and I'm tired of telling people we don't have any more wine. And so if one of the outcomes of a wine trail is increased visitation, for a winery that doesn't need that, that's not necessarily a valued outcome. And so they're going to be less motivated to participate. Okay, so here's expectancy theory with our little model. So we have these, you know, 3 wineries that are thinking about collaborating on a wine festival. The idea is effort will lead to outcome. So what is going to affect people's knowledge of this or idea of whether this wine festival is going to lead to positive outcomes? Could be their past experience. Hey, you know, I worked on one of these wine festivals before and it was just a disaster. I read about this, you know, place in Minnesota that did a wine festival, nobody came, and, you know, everybody spent a ton of time working on it. It was just a disaster, whatever it is. Or it could be, I've worked with Winery C before, and I don't think anything they do is going to lead to a positive outcome. Efficacy is whether they think they have the skills to be able to pull off the wine festival themselves, or if they need other people to participate. How difficult the task is. You know, there are just 3 of us wineries putting on a wine festival. That's kind of a difficult deal, especially where we're all busy. Control, you know, Winery B might want more control than Winery A. That's always an issue. So those are the things that are going to lead to confidence in whether the investment of effort or investment of finances is going to lead to positive outcomes. Now imagine Winery A drops out of this. As you can see here, there's no more arrow. If they drop out of this wine festival, how does the expectancy change of Winery B and C? You know, if they felt like, hey, Winery A had all this expertise, their, you know, understanding of the effort may, or the likelihood of success may go down. Okay, so valence is the other part of it, and this is how much each winery values the outcomes that are likely to come. So is the outcome desirable? You know, that depends on the winery's objectives, what they're looking for. It depends on their needs, what they're good at, what they're not good at, their preferences, their values, what's important to them. All of these things are going to affect their value of the outcome. So if the positive outcomes are more tasting room visitors, increase in wine sales, more wine drinkers, improved brand equity, you know, according to this theory, they're only going to be motivated if these things are important to them. Okay. Again, this isn't rocket science. This is pretty, you know, common sense stuff, but it's important to think about because sometimes we don't. We don't understand why the other wineries don't want to work with us. Or it may not be a winery. It could be a restaurant or a hotel, motel, or bed and breakfast. And especially when you're talking about other tourism businesses as opposed to wineries, because their objectives, the positive outcomes are going to mean less to them. So, for instance, improved brand equity in a region's wine, that's still important to a bed and breakfast, but it might not be important to them as it is to the winery. So, you know, you have to ask, do all of the wineries want these rewards, or do all of the organizations that you are hoping to collaborate with want these rewards? Okay. You know, as I mentioned earlier, let's say Winery C is small, they might not want more tasting room visitors, as an example. Okay. Just moving on. So we conducted a study. We had 25 randomly selected wine regions in 25 different U.S. states. I would say this study is ongoing. What I'm presenting to you is from the 25 regions. We've got another 10 or so that we're working with that we just don't have the data done yet. The 25 randomly selected wine regions in 25 different states. These wine regions are all considered to be emerging wine regions, so they're not the Napas and the Sonomas and the Willamettes of the world. They're smaller places around the country. We developed a survey instrument about collaboration based on the 2 theories that I just explained to you. We surveyed both wineries and tourism businesses that exist in these wine regions. So you can see here we identified 353 wineries, 121 hotels, motels, 155 bed and breakfasts, 168 restaurants, destination marketing organizations, recreation providers, and tour operators. Those are the ones we solicited responses from, but we got about a 36.7% response rate, which is actually pretty decent for survey research and really good when you're talking about surveying businesses. But those response rates vary. So different restaurants, for instance, had I think a less than 20% response rate. It was really difficult to hear from restaurants, but we did hear from a lot of them still, enough to get a sense as to what they felt was important. So that's the nature of the study. So first of all, looking at winery collaboration with other wineries. So I'll present this, and then I'll talk about wineries collaborating with tourism industry. And we've got a lot of different findings here that we got from the research. I'm just going to present some of the more interesting stuff here because of our limited time. Okay, so areas to collaborate winery to winery. In addition to the co-ops we mentioned earlier, we have wine trails, events, marketing promotion, influencing policy, regional strategic planning, research, education of visitors, training employees, understanding and addressing problems, equipment use, bulk purchases. All of these are things that wineries commonly collaborate with each other on. Community relations as well. So we asked about some of these, and we asked, first of all, we asked the wineries, to what extent do you participate in any of these? And here's what we found. Obviously, at the top, you can see 95% of the wineries that we talked to participated in wine trails. In part, that's because the way the reason that number is so high, one, first of all, a lot of wineries do participate in wine trails, but the way we identified regions was based on wine trails. Now that said, when we did identify a region based on a wine trail, we did try to find any winery, regardless as to whether they were part of that trail. So that's why we don't have 100% participating in wine trails. But you get the sense that that is one of the most common ways of collaborating. Events and festivals also very high. Cross-promoting each other's wineries and wines. Wine quality improvement was also quite high. And you can read all of these down. As a researcher, I was a little disappointed to see that not many of them are funding research, but later questions sort of answered the why they're not, and I'll explain that in a second. So this table shows those same things, but they're not ranked by the level of participation, but rather they're ranked based on the winery's indication of their return on investment of that collaboration. So we asked the first question, which of these do you participate in? And if they participated in one of these, they got a follow-up question specifically for that said, what is the return on investment of that? And so these are ranked based on the return on investment. You can see that sharing equipment, even though not as many of them participated in it, was listed as the #1 return on investment. Wine trails was #2, so that, again, is very high participation and high return on investment. Cross-promotion is also quite good. All the way down to funding research, which was listed as, participating in research and funding research were listed as 2 of the lowest return on investments of all of the collaborative initiatives we asked people about. Now that was kind of interesting because, as a researcher, we have to ask ourselves, are we doing a good enough job of communicating the benefits of what we're doing? Maybe having these webinars will make a difference there, Okay, some of the other collaboration findings. Wineries felt strongly that collaboration with other wineries was important to the success of the wine region. So they're very strong support that they thought that it was important to collaborate with other wineries in order to have a more successful region. Wineries collaborate more with each other than with tourism organizations. They recognize that they tend to collaborate more with each other than with tourism organizations. But they also mentioned that collaboration with tourism organizations is more important to their success, or to the success of their winery, than collaborating with other wineries. So even though they don't collaborate with tourism organizations as much, they do realize that it's probably more valuable to the success of their winery. The 2 most likely benefits from winery collaboration that were mentioned are return of investment on marketing and improved visitor experience. Those were some things we asked about, what are the benefits of winery to winery collaboration, and they mentioned these 2 things. And those two things were also the most important to the success of the winery, another question we asked them. Okay, so moving on here, winery collaboration with the tourism system. So we asked the wineries about their collaboration with tourism businesses, and we asked tourism businesses about their collaboration with wineries. So first of all, the areas to collaborate, a lot of these are pretty similar. You know, that wineries can collaborate with the tourism system, offering packages, you know, putting on events, cross-promotion, destination development or branding, wine branding, education programs, employee training, you know, especially around customer service and hospitality type of things, tourism planning, in different tourism niches like culinary or agricultural tourism, a lot of areas to collaborate there. So we did a similar thing. We asked with whom are wineries collaborating? So we asked the wineries, which of these tourism organizations that are listed in the left-hand column are you collaborating with? The most common one was a destination marketing organization. These are the tourism offices, the convention and visitors bureaus, any kind of organization that is trying to market a destination. So most every, or that was the, not everybody is doing that, but that was the highest level of participation. A lot of wineries are collaborating with restaurants. They're collaborating with bed and breakfast on a high level and hotels, motels, a little less with tourism, tour operators, which a lot of these regions, they haven't really developed a good tour operating system yet. But, you know, there's usually somebody who's renting out a van. You know, recreation providers and other food and beverage. That could be breweries or a cheese shop or something. So this was sort of an interesting thing we asked. We asked the tourism organizations this question. We asked the extent to which they agree with a few statements. So this statement, I think recent growth in the number of wineries in the U.S. is a good thing. We asked, again, tourism organizations in wine regions, the extent to which they agreed with it. And here's what we found. On a scale of 1 to 10, you can see that the numbers were pretty high. What's interesting here is that restaurants had the highest number. Restaurants felt very strongly that the growth in the number of wineries in the U.S. is good. Now that's more interesting in comparison to a slide I'm about to show you. So we also asked the following questions, again, worded a little differently. This question: the presence of wineries in this region is good for this organization. The presence of winery makes this region a better tourism destination. The wineries in this region can improve the tourism experience for visitors. So we asked these, and this was on a score of 30. And you can see that destination marketing organizations really appreciated the wineries in their region. That makes sense. They're trying to promote them. But what's really quite interesting here is that all of a sudden you see that hotels and motels and restaurants have among the lowest scores. And you know, we did some follow-up calls to try to learn about this, and what we think was happening is wineries saw collaborating with restaurants as, hey, we want them to sell our wine. Restaurants are thinking, you know what, at the price we need to sell those at, our margin isn't as good as if we buy bulk wine from South America or California, and people, you know, they don't like it, some of them, as much. You know, we did see a different emphasis with restaurants that emphasized local food because obviously this is more important to them. And why this is most interesting is because what restaurants don't seem to be getting is this is something we got from our tasting room visitor survey. If you look at this, a lot of people, this is a question we asked the tasting room visitors: how far is your home or second home from the first winery that you visited? And a lot of people, over 50%, are traveling more than 100 miles to get to a winery. And here's what they're spending. You know, they tend to spend about 2.7 nights per winery visit. 65% of people are part of an overnight trip. During the trip, they bought an average of 7.4 bottles of wine at $16.50 per bottle. And they spent over the course of their trip $780. Now that $780 is spent at places like restaurants and hotels, motels. So I think there's definitely a communication gap with the restaurants and the hotels, motels, and the wineries on what the goals are of the collaboration. And if the wineries are trying to push, hey, it would really be helpful to us if you sold our wine, and the restaurants, you know, don't see the benefit of that, they should see the fact that the wineries are driving business into their restaurant. They don't seem to be doing it. So, yeah, we're about, and you can see that the wineries are an important reason that they are traveling to the area. We asked that question, and 18% said it was the only reason, and a lot of them said it was very important and important. Okay, really short on time. I apologize for that, but I have time for any questions.
Okay, we haven't had any questions come in yet, so let's give it a few minutes and see. Wait and see if anybody has any questions. Thanks, Dan, by the way.
Yeah, sure.
While we are waiting for questions to come in, I am going to go ahead and switch over. Oh, I gotta get control back here. Go ahead and switch over to the upcoming webinar schedule and also post a link to the post-webinar survey. We would really appreciate that everybody take the survey as they're getting ready to sign out of the webinar, click on that link and go take the survey. So with that, we do have a couple of questions. I think Sam is asking, is AVA recognition important? I'm not really sure if that's what the question is. So Sam, if that isn't the question, if you could clarify that. But Dan, do you know the answer to, is AVA recognition important?
I don't know. That isn't something that we asked, and to be honest with you, I need to go back to the regions we looked at and to figure out which ones do have AVAs. I suspect most of them do, but I don't think we've even looked at that. So that's a really good point. I look forward to investigating that.
Okay, thanks. One quick question I want to address is people have been asking if handouts are going to be available. And yes, handouts of the slides will be available as a PDF on the website when I post the recording of the webinar. And that should either happen by tomorrow or Thursday. So with that, Lanita asks, do you have suggestions on how to begin discussions on forming a wine trail?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing is to figure out what each winery hopes to get out of a wine trail, and thinking realistically about the amount of effort that's going to have to be put on. Because if there's a discussion about forming a wine trail, it's probably an emerging area, probably with smaller and newer wineries. That's not always the case, but that often is the case. And they're really busy, and they have very limited time. They have very limited money. And so I think being realistic about or understanding the objectives of each winery and having a wine trail, as well as the amount of effort that's going to be put in, is quite important. Because if the benefits of the wine trail are more important for some of the wineries than others, the ones for whom it's those outcomes are less important aren't going to be as motivated, and therefore probably aren't going to invest as much time and money into it. So I think that really understanding the objectives and understanding the amount of time that needs to be put into it. Also, I think there's always a question as to whether somebody within the wineries is going to help to administer it, or is there going to be a pool of money that'll hire somebody.
Okay, and then Greg McConnell had a comment where he pointed out that, wow, Dan, that's 84% of what the tourists are spending is on non-wine purchases. Yeah,
that's right, and that's one of the things that I know here in Michigan that the wine industry is really trying to emphasize to the tourism industry, and that's, I think that the destination marketing organizations get that. They understand the benefit of having wineries in a region makes that region more attractive. What I don't think is understood is the restaurants and the hotel motels. They're not necessarily understanding the benefit. Now, bed and breakfasts are different. Bed and breakfasts do understand the benefits of having wineries. And I think that's because the bed and breakfast owners interact with the winery visitors more so than the hotel motel owners do. The hotel motel owners, they might know if a tour group of youth sports parents are coming in for a tournament, because they usually book as a group. They're very loud. They're aware of them, and they appreciate their business, but they're just very aware of them. That's not the case with couples who are booking individually, coming into and out of the hotel without talking to anybody and going to visit the winery. They're less aware of the amount of people who are visiting the winery.
Okay, another question from Don asks, are there any studies on non-winery trails? Winery, creamery, agritourism stop. Not sure.
I'm not aware of, I know there have been some studies done on breweries and brewery tourism. I'm not sure about some of the others that you mentioned. There have been some done on agritourism, but I'm not, but not in the, not necessarily looking at going from one to another. Oftentimes it's just looking at one destination, as opposed to, you know, one of the things with wineries is people tend to go to multiple wineries, especially, you know, when you're talking about a region. Obviously, an isolated winery is going to be an individual attraction, but in wine regions, people are going from stop to stop. And I'm not familiar with any agritourism research that looks at that kind of travel.
Okay. Mick asks, are there any regional economic impact studies that indicate the money spent at a winery by the average customer?
Well, there are lots of economic impact analyses on the wine industry. In fact, the Northern Grapes Project did some of these. One of the things, though, that a lot of them don't have good numbers on is what is happening with wine tourism. A lot of them look at the grape growing and the processing and the winemaking, but they don't have a good sense of what's going on in the tourism part. Our other study of tasting room visitors did look at this. And one of the slides I had earlier, let me find it here. Oh. And you can see here during the trip, respondents bought, and this is at Michigan wineries overall. Respondents over the course of their trip to wineries bought 7.5 bottles of wine at $16.50 per bottle. So that's not all of the expenditures that go on at wineries, but that's most of it there. So if you multiply 7.4 times 16.5, you'll get a number.
Yeah. And then Virginia asks, how does bus tourism play into this?
So bus tourism is very important. By the way, that number is $122 per person per visit to a winery. So bus tourism is important, although one of the things, part of attracting bus tourism is attracting the recognition of the business. A bus isn't going to want to promote tours to a wine region that nobody's heard of because they're probably not going to be able to fill their bus. So what you tend to see with emerging regions is, once there's a need for it, enough people are coming and they don't want to drive, there's usually some local people who will buy a van or a car and often drive people around, and the wineries help them to promote themselves, often working with the wine trail to do that. As a region continues to grow, the buses become more important because they can bring in large numbers of people, and they tend to bring people in from outside. Here in Michigan, we have wine tours come from Chicago all the time on buses, where people in a large population area like Chicago will get on a bus and go out to Michigan. The southwest part of Michigan particularly benefits from that. Up in the Traverse City area, it's kind of interesting, and this is something we noted from our other studies. There are two wine trails. There's the Old Mission Peninsula and there's the Leelanau Peninsula. And one of the things we noticed in our research is we've got a lot more women in the Leelanau Peninsula than in the Old Mission Peninsula. And both of them are very close to Traverse City, which is the main destination of the tourists to the area. And we thought that was interesting. And one of the reasons we think that gender discrepancy occurs is because more buses go to Leelanau Peninsula than Old Mission Peninsula. There are a lot of reasons for that, but the roads are a little bit more friendly. There's more options for buses there. And one of the things with bus tours is they tend to attract more women than guys. The other benefit to the Old Mission, it's a little closer to Traverse City, and you can do all the wineries in a half day as opposed to spending a whole day on Leelanau Peninsula. And I think the assumption is that a woman trying to convince her partner to come traveling with her to the wineries is more likely to get them for an afternoon than a whole day.
Okay. We still have about 5 questions, Dan. Do you have time to hang around and answer them?
I sure do.
Okay. So Tim Martinson asked, is there any threshold number of wineries that constitute a critical mass for joint marketing?
Well, it depends what you talk about by joint marketing. No, two wineries can start joint marketing, but certain types of marketing efforts are going to take more wineries. You know, the example I gave earlier of 3 wines creating a wine trail, that might be feasible, but it's not much of a wine trail with just 3 wineries, and it's also a lot of effort for those 3 wineries. You need a higher number. I haven't taken a look, that's maybe another way of looking at it, or another thing to look at in the future, Tim, but to look at what those thresholds are for different marketing efforts. You know, something like cross-promotion, you know, is just those 3 wineries having an agreement to recommend, you know, the other wineries to anybody who comes into their winery. Oh, you like our winery? You should really visit our neighbors. They're about 10 miles down the road. They have really nice wines, too. And, you know, one of the things that happens, especially with if a winery's been in an area for a long time alone, they tend to be a little more suspicious of a new winery that's opening up. But what they have to think about is the perspective of the traveler. It's much more interesting to go to more than one winery than it is to go to just one. And it doesn't mean that one's any better than the other. You know, what we like in wineries is diversity. Diversity of the winery, diversity of the tasting room, diversity of the views. I mean, all the reasons that people are going. And one of the things that our tasting room survey showed is that the largest reason for visiting wineries in Michigan anyway was not wine-related reasons, it was social reasons, leisure reasons, a chance to socialize and spend time together. And so to that extent, you know, having more variety, going from one winery to another, is really part of what they're looking for.
Okay. Then Katrina had a couple of questions. Her first one was, have there been any studies on the costs of trail participation versus return on investment benefits?
Well, only that in this survey we asked wineries about the return on investment. We didn't calculate them, we just asked them to rank the return of investment. It said on a scale of 1 to 5, what is the return on investment for all of these things that you collaborate on? And the number one, I don't have the numbers with me, but the number one return on investment was sharing equipment, but a close to was participating in a wine trail. So that was something that the winery felt was a good return on investment. But again, we didn't ask them to calculate the return on investment. And I'm not aware of any studies that have done that.
Okay. And then Katrina also asks, how do you evaluate costs of memberships to newly formed wine trails?
Well, I don't. Katrina, could you clarify your question? What do you mean trying to figure out what is the right cost?
Okay, give her time to type in her clarification, and we'll move on to a question from Robert, who's asking, if you sell wine at $20 a bottle, what could you expect a restaurant to pay?
Well, that's a good question. And you know, a restaurant that's selling South American wine or California bulk wine can often get that wine for $4 or $5 a bottle and sell it for $20+ Their markup is very high. You know, most you know, smaller wineries, they don't have the economies of scale to be able to produce wine for that cheaply, and so they have to sell it for $16, $17, $20 a bottle. And so automatically, unless a restaurant is really interested in selling local stuff, and a lot of them do have this theme, especially in wine regions, but it's not going to be as attractive to them because the markup isn't as high. And at the same time, you know, depending on the kind of the wine, you know, the people who are likely to buy wine at restaurants are people who are have a little bit more experience with wine, and they probably have different tastes, and they might not value the local wine as much as the wines they're used to drinking as much. So if they're asked to pay $25 for a bottle of wine, you know, what's better, a $25 bottle of local Pinot Noir or a Pinot Noir from, you know, somewhere else, say Oregon or something.
Okay, then we have a question from Dorothy, who asks if you have any data on the age ranges of winery visitors.
Yes, we do. I don't have it right in front of me, but I can tell you we did look at it in ranges by decade. The two largest, or the two greatest number of visitors was 50 to 60-year-olds, or 51 to 60-year-olds, and 21 to 30-year-olds. Those are the two biggest age groups. We also looked at the spending behavior of those folks, and the older folks tended to buy or spend more at the winery than the younger folks. So, you know, that makes sense. There's a big dip in the people from 30 to 50. That's because they have kids, and they, you know, taking a trip to the winery isn't as practice. The 20 to 30-year-olds, 21 to 30-year-olds, they don't tend to have kids, and the 50 to 60-year-olds, the kids are out of the house.
Yes, I can say for a fact that I don't do a lot of winery visiting because I have two little kids, and it just doesn't work. So anyway, well, I never did hear back from Katrina with the clarification to her question, so that's all of our questions. I do want everybody, oh, here, Katrina came back with it. She says in the Thumb area, which I assume she means the Thumb of Michigan, a new trail is organizing called Thumbs Up. I am looking at our costs for opening a small wine tasting room and wondering if the $1,000 plus membership cost plus annual fees will be worthwhile for us in our first year, or if they should wait a year, keeping in mind our bottom line expenses. Our orchard is an agritourism destination in Southeast Michigan is established, just celebrating our 200th year as a family farm. And so she says the first speaker really spoke the truth of initial investments to get things up and running.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for her. You know, I think that the Thumb is likely to be, I mean, the answer to this question is going to vary on the specific situation. I do think the Thumb has great potential to attract visitors. It's close to a high population area in Southeast Michigan, and there are a few wineries that exist there already, and tasting rooms. The ones in Lexington, Blue Water, and then, you know, up in just north of Bad Axe. And I think there are a couple others that have either opened recently or about to open. And I do think that eventually it's going to get there. Whether $1,000 you're going to recoup your investment next year on $1,000, I couldn't say.
Okay, one thing I do want to point out, too, to everyone is Dan has written a couple of articles for the last two Northern Grapes newsletters that cover a lot of the data that he's collected in these tasting room surveys, he and Don Holochek at Michigan State. So if you guys are interested in this tasting room information, please go to our website and get the past issues of the Northern Grapes newsletter. And then he's also planning some future articles, so keep on the lookout for those.
Yeah, I think we got the tasting room visitor survey. We got a lot of really great information from. I mean, stuff we're still analyzing. And so, yeah, for at least the next 3 newsletters, we'll have something to contribute to those. So.
Okay. Well, I think that we've taken care of all of the questions. So anyway, I really do want to thank Greg and Dan for your time and agreeing to do the webinars today. It was great. Everybody is also welcome to join for the 7 p.m. session tonight. Greg has plans to go get a new microphone before then. So if you'd like to join in so that you can hear Greg's presentation a little better, please do. We'd love to have you again. So with that, thanks everybody. Thanks to Greg and Dan for speaking, and thanks to all of our listeners for participating.
Great. Thanks, Kirsten.
Thanks,
Tim.
Bye.